of mine, is where we're going to focus a little bit today, is teaching traditional texts in new ways. So I really like to study Talmud. Rabbi Greninger and I actually have this in common. She also really likes Talmud study. I don't know if any of you have studied Talmud with her before, but it's a document, the Talmud, which I'll talk a little bit about later, that is unwieldy to be kind, and esoteric and perhaps irrelevant at its worst moments. And there's so much wisdom there. And so one of the things that I'm really passionate about is looking at these documents that are perhaps a little bit more foreign to us, especially as Reformed Jews, and saying, actually, what can they say to us? How can they speak to us? What can we glean from them that I think is actually very relevant to our lives today? Okay, so that's a little bit about me. I'll just finish that up. So I'm married. My wife, Rabbi Madeline Budman, is also a rabbi. So the rabbinic family continues, as she is the rabbi educator at Congregation Emmanuel in the city. So she supervises all of their youth education work from a vision and curriculum kind of standpoint. So she's downtown in the city doing that work, and I'm out here, and we live in Pleasant Hill. Yes, it's a bit of a commute for her. She loves her audiobooks. It's all been good. We're really happy. And okay, I'll pause there. Does anybody have any kind of questions or comments or reflections on my personal bio? And then I'll move into other things. Okay. Keep going. Yes, I'll take a couple.
Is it operating? Yes?
Yeah, it's on. It's on.
It's on, okay. My question as an educator is, okay, American University, tell us a little bit about your education from the beginning. Tell us a little about nursery school, primary school, middle school, high school, and do you have any friends from those institutions that you participated with?
I'll tell you briefly. So I did preschool on Long Island in New York, where my family was when I was really little. I don't have any friends from that part of my life. I then went to a Jewish day school from kindergarten through 8th grade. It was a conservative day school, even though we're a Reform family, kind of like CCJDS. It was open to all streams of Judaism. I do still have some friends from my time at Jewish Day School, a number of whom we reconnected during COVID. I don't know if anybody else had this experience where all of a sudden there were way more kind of reunion Zooms and things like that we got on. So some, like my carpool buddy and I have been close. We also went to high school together. And then some others that I have reconnected with, some friends who are now journalists at like JTA, and people who just graduated law school and all kinds of other stuff. I did high school at a big public high school where I did an IB program, which is kind of an advanced learning program. And I have a couple friends still from high school as well, like a couple, like 2 from here and 2 from there, and then a nice group from college. And then I did 5 years of rabbinical school, right? So I don't know if any other rabbi has told you this, but the path to becoming a rabbi is you get your undergraduate degree and then 5 more years of school where you get a master's along the way. So that's 1 year in Jerusalem at our Jerusalem campus of HUC. And then I did 4 years in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is where HUC was founded, where the Reformed Judaism in America was founded in Cincinnati. And maybe we can do that history another time. But that's a little bit about my schooling. There was one other hand I saw. Great. I'll take this question, and then
no, because it won't get on the
it won't get recorded. So your question has to be recorded in perpetuity. So I hope it's worthy of the YouTube.
It's sort of a mom question. Do
Please.
you have any siblings?
I do. I'm a middle child. I don't know if anybody's like into the psychology of birth order. So I'm a middle child. I have a younger sister who's 4 years younger than me, and an older brother who's about 17 months older than me. I will then say, just to complicate that story a little bit, both of my siblings have intellectual disabilities. They both still live in Florida with my parents. Well, my sister lives at home and my brother lives nearby. We can talk all about that later. And I am very appreciative. I know a lot of our members have in the past or continue to work with the students who have special needs and students with intellectual disabilities. And so I am personally always very grateful for those contributions. And so we can talk about my siblings later. They're lovely. My sister Hannah will be here for my installation in August. So it'll be an exciting time for all of us. Yeah, that's my family. Okay, last one, and then I really am going to move on. Howard, you get the last question for this segment.
The last question is, my wife went to American University.
Yes.
But a long time ago. Are they as anti-Semitic as we read?
My experience really wasn't. So I can't speak, I can speak to some things that I've heard from people in the past year or two. My experience was very positive. American University was interesting, was about 30% Jewish. It is about 90% Democratic and 10% Trump supporters. I didn't meet any traditional Republicans during my 4 years at American. It was a place of incredible political activism on both sides of the spectrum, and an incredibly diverse place. And my experience, especially as a Jew on campus, was entirely positive. There was one really minor incident that barely made bubbles and was handled very well, and that was that. I've talked to some students in the past couple of years who have also reported the same thing. I think colleges are interesting in that sometimes there are major events that really impact an entire campus, and other times, just like the rest of the world, we have our circle, we have our group. So if you are a political science person like I was, and all of my friends were also political science majors. If you're in the business school, like that's really your community. So my experience of college, and even people that I've talked to that have had incidents on their campus, said that it was really hard for the people that were there directly kind of connected to, but even at a university like American, which is very liberal and was only 7,500 undergrads, was still one of a positive experience and of enough kind of pockets that any kind of incidents that they had heard of were pretty isolated. And I know that's not everybody's kind of experience. So I think that one of the things that I really work on for myself personally, and I think for all of us is good for us to keep in mind, is just the sheer diversity of experiences and of opportunities in America, in colleges, on a single college campus. I really try and I think I read these news articles and I have some skepticism, not 100%. There are some really serious issues on college campuses. And also, there are millions and millions and millions of college students, not all of whom are experiencing some of the things that we read about, right? So for me, I work on not generalizing necessarily from one incident to an entire thing, unless there's enough evidence that makes it warranted to do so. And so I think for me, that's kind of where I sit. I had a really positive experience there just 4 or 5 years ago. I have friends that are still there who are Jewish, who continue to have really positive experiences at American and in DC. I was talking to a student at GW, George Washington, which is one of the neighboring schools, who she had some issues, but still overall felt like even the kinds of disagreements that were significant and serious and sometimes anti-Semitic were not reflective of anything broader than this group of students or this group of individuals. So that was my experience at American. Okay, we're gonna pivot. We're gonna go back in time 1,000+ years. And if I could have some help passing out. So I have a handout. Julie, you're running back and forth. Here are some, thank you, Marianne. I'm going to teach one of my favorite texts from the Talmud. So I'm going to give us a brief background of the Talmud. Maybe this is stuff that you already know. Maybe some of us are newer to Talmud study. So I'll give us a brief kind of introduction, and then we'll study this text together. I'll ask some questions. We'll have some discussion around it, and that'll be our hour. The Talmud it was completed in the 7th or 8th century in Babylonia, modern-day Iran. I wrote my rabbinic thesis on Talmud, I'll just say, right? So part of what I think about is like how to then communicate. What is this massive document? It's massive. It's about 3,000 Talmud pages, which is a whole shelf in my library, 2 shelves actually. And it's an anthology. It's a compilation of rabbinic sources and debates and traditions. There's one, we need I think one more over there. It is organized around another document called the Mishnah, which was finished in the year 200 in Israel, which is about Jewish law. But the Talmud wanders way beyond Jewish laws. We're going to see we're not going to talk about any law, really. We're going to talk about there's stories, there are recipes, there are medicinal treatments, there are analyses of human psychology, there is astrology in the Talmud. It really is a window into a few hundred years of Jewish life and the things that the rabbis were talking about and thinking about. And it became the basis of the foundational document of rabbinic Judaism. There's a joke that I'll tell you. It's a really bad joke, so I'm just going to warn you about yeshivas, or kind of traditional Jewish houses of study. There were these 2 yeshiva boys who one day after class went to the local bookstore, and they were looking around seeing what new books they could buy. And they see the Talmud sets, and they see some commentaries, and they see some other stuff. And finally, one of the boys says, "Ooh, look at what I found," and calls the other boy over and picks up a book and flips through it and says, "Look, this is a book of all of the proof texts of all of the verses that are found in the Talmud," i.e., the Bible. In yeshiva education, they focus on Talmud study, not on Torah study, right? So they'll learn Torah, but really for the purpose of Talmud, not vice versa. Whereas a lot of our study, I would say, is mostly Torah-focused, not Talmud-focused. The Talmud really became the center of rabbinic Judaism, then later Orthodox Judaism, the basis for Jewish law, although it does not only contain law, nor was it the final authority on the law. One of the interesting things about the Talmud is very rarely is there an end to an argument. This side says this, that side says that, they debate back and forth, and then they move on. And they don't tell you, so who wins the debate? It is the next several hundred years of rabbis that decide, and this is how we light candles. One of the most famous examples is how do we light Hanukkah candles? And the first night we light 1 candle, and then we light 2, and then 3, on to 8. Well, in the Talmud, there's a debate there's another rabbi that says we should start with 8 on the first night, because that was the amount of oil, was more. And the oil decreases as Hanukkah goes on, so we should decrease the number of candles that we light. And the Talmud then doesn't resolve that debate for us. It is later that we come to decide who is right and how do we practice. That's the Talmud. Should I clarify anything? Okay. You can also, if you want to dump all that out of your brain, you don't really need that for what we're going to do, but that was just a little bit of background. So this story that we're going to read is a story between Moses, from the Torah, Moses, and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is from one of the earliest generations of rabbis, right around and after the destruction of the Second Temple. So he is kind of in the 50s to the 60s to the 20s, 130s of the Common Era. That's when he lived, right? So just because I'm naming these 2 characters across time tells you something about the mythological nature of this story. I will posit now and consistently in everything that I teach that even the authors of these stories don't believe they actually happened, right? A lot of our stories in our tradition, even if they were about real people, are not necessarily true in a historical sense, but use those characters to teach us something else important. Even amongst the ultra-Orthodox today, I don't think you would find somebody that really believes that, as we see in the story, Moses time traveled from Mount Sinai to Rabbi Akiva's study hall, right? Which is what happens in the story. I don't believe that happened, and I think that also most people don't believe it happened. We should take it as a fictional story to begin with. Okay. We're going to read the story. We're going to talk about it. You'll see, I think it's really interesting. The story is in 3 parts. It comes from a tractate called Menachot, which is one of the parts of the Talmud. There's like 36 tractates in the Talmud. This is one of them. It has a bunch of stuff that isn't relevant. We're not going to go in there. And then the story appears. Rav Yehuda said that Rav said, so they're quoting back from rabbis, at the time that Moses ascended on high, as in Moses went up Mount Sinai to receive the Torah, he found God sitting and tying crowns on the letters of Torah. Moses said, Master of the universe, who is preventing you from giving Torah? God replied, there will be a man many generations in the future named Akiva ben Yosef, Rabbi Akiva. In the future, he will derive from each and every thorn piles and piles of halachot. I'm going to pause here. How many of us have seen the inside of a Torah scroll, either in reality or in pictures, right? And we can kind of imagine there's like little flourishes on the top of these letters. They're often called crowns, little extra decoration or ornamentation, so ornamented kind of letters. And so the rabbis are doing a couple of things here. One, they're asking, why? Why are these crowns on our Torah texts? Why is it not just written like every other text? 2, they're telling us that in their mind, Moses had a Torah with these crowns on it. And even if you don't believe that, we can understand that the Torah that's in our arks is the same Torah that they were looking at 2,000 years ago. They have the same crowns that we have on our scrolls, which I think is incredible in its own right. You know, even if you don't want to believe in the 3,000-year tradition, the 2,000-year tradition is still pretty good. And Moses is also impatient, right? Moses was up there for 40 days and 40 nights and wanted to bring Torah back down to the people, and God is sitting there doodling on the top of the letters, and Moses says, what's going on here? And so God then replies that many generations in the future, Rabbi Akiva will come and derive halachot, or Jewish law, from every little thing in the Torah. So there's a part of Jewish law that says that there's nothing superfluous in a Torah scroll. Every time a word is repeated, that's important. Every time there's an extra word that doesn't need to be there, that's important. Every preposition is important. Every crown on the top of the letters is important because Rabbi Akiva will create Jewish law out of the crowns. I want to come back to why that's important when we get to the end of the story. But I want us to think about what it means that the rabbis say that these little flourishes carry significance not just in art, but in Jewish law. Okay, so then what happens next? Let's go to the next part of our story. Moses says to God, show him to me, as in show me Rabbi Akiva. God replies, turn around. Moses went and sat at the end of the 8th row of Rabbi Akiva's study hall. Unlike today, maybe this was an experience you had, although I don't think so. In the Babylonian kind of learning system, the smartest students got placed in the front. The most learned students, the most experienced students got placed in the front. And in every subsequent row, somebody was a little bit less learned until you got to the 8th row, which was the last row, which was reserved for the students that didn't know what was going on. Clearly not the situation here. I see very engaged learners in our last row. So, but Moses went to the end, the last row. He did not know what they were saying, and his strength waned. I want to say that the text is clear here that it's not, he didn't understand the language, but he couldn't comprehend what they were saying. When Rabbi Akiva arrived at one matter, Akiva's student, maybe somebody also in the 8th row, said to him, Rabbi, where do you get this from? How do you know this? And Akiva responds, this is the halacha from Moses on Sinai. And Moses' mind was put at ease. Okay, so what's the problem here, the tension here? Does anybody want to kind of call out what you think the gap is? What's the logical fallacy in this story? There wasn't an answer, right? Especially because Moses had no idea what was going on. So how is it that Akiva says this is the law from Moses when Moses is sitting there in the room and doesn't know what's happening? But his mind is at ease. Okay. So what we have here is a few interesting things, right? First of all, we have Moses showing up to a classroom of Jewish learning. Moses, our greatest prophet, the giver of Torah, shows up in a Jewish learning seminar and has no idea what's happening. What are the rabbis telling us about Moses in this story? He's not too smart. Okay, maybe. He might be out of touch. We're going to come back to that piece, Wendy, in a minute. Yeah? He didn't pretend to know everything, right? So even our greatest teacher still had, Moses was also a very humble person, right? Our Torah text teaches us he had a lot of humility. So here's an example of that. He had faith in what? Or whom? In God. That, spell that out a little bit more for me. Okay, so the Torah came down and Moses maybe didn't understand it, but because it came from God, it was worth it. So perhaps Moses read the law, he gave the law, but that doesn't mean he had to understand the words that he was saying. Neil, and then I'll come to Marianne. Yeah. Great. Okay, so we're going to come back to that. I'm going to hold on to that piece too. Moses is perhaps unsure about his connection to the future, and then Marianne, yeah. And that there might have been more to learn. He was open to learning. Okay, yeah. Okay, so now we're going to come to Moses' mind being put at ease here, which is where a lot of these comments are now kind of coming in on. So Moses appears into this classroom, and he doesn't understand what's going on, and then, right, the rabbi in the classroom says, what I'm teaching you came from Moses, and Moses is sitting right there, and Moses could say, well, that didn't come from me, and yet his mind was put at ease for maybe a couple reasons. One, he was still being remembered and thought of as a lawgiver, right? So there's a sense of Moses living on in perpetuity, even beyond his own wisdom. There's a sense of Moses' openness to learning something new, and a sense of connection that even though what's new is different from what's old, that doesn't mean that there's no connection there. Has any of us felt like Moses in the back of the classroom sometime? Where like you're sitting in a room and somebody says something, you're just like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Yeah, right? I think that happens a lot for us, right? The next generation comes along and tries to tell you something. Like even for me as a relatively younger person, I was sitting with a group of teens yesterday. Let me tell you, they were talking about things that they're like one generation below me, and I have no idea what's going on, right? So that happens to some of us too, right? The next generation says something, teaches something, tries to communicate something that we just don't comprehend. And yet I was sitting here in the sanctuary with these teens, and even if I didn't understand what they were saying, they were telling it to me in a Jewish context, in a Jewish space, with a connection to Jewish tradition, right? And that was something, yeah. Okay, so Great. So knowledge evolves, right? So one of our core debates in our country currently, I have a political science degree, so I can't help it, is whether or not the Constitution was written as a historical document rooted in a certain time and place, or was a document written in perpetuity that was supposed to extend forever, right? When we have amendments to the Constitution that granted women the right to vote, that granted black people the right to vote, it was a recognition that the morals of the 1770s may or may not work for us today. And so too, right, our knowledge evolves, our learning evolves, our ethics and values might evolve. Right, like I think in the last 20 years, the whole new concepts of gender and sexuality have really been opened up for a lot of us in new ways. And we might not totally get it or understand it, but we have certain values that are then, we want people to be included and to be their full selves. And so even if we don't quite get it, it's important that we live out those values, perhaps with new knowledge to the best of our abilities, right? So this is the tension I think that the rabbis are grappling with. And I'll just kind of name an implicit understanding, and this is really important for Reform Jews. The rabbis are admitting that their Judaism is not the Judaism of Moses, right? That if you took a Jew out of time and moved them somewhere else, that they won't know what's going on. Right? We often think about Orthodox Judaism as Torah true Judaism, or Judaism that is more authentic or more rooted in something. In reality, most of modern Orthodox Judaism is from the Enlightenment era, from the 17th and 18th century. Yes, rooted in previous centuries' work, but a modern Orthodox Jew and Rabbi Akiva are as far apart as in the story Rabbi Akiva and Moses are, right? There's a connection, there's a relationship, but it is not the same thing. Yeah, Hugh. Great, right? So if our first number of our presidents owned slaves, and we've evolved since then, our whole world evolves. And this text is trying to figure out, what do we do amidst an evolving world? How do we engage in a world that is constantly changing, which was a challenge for the rabbis, which was a challenge for Moses, and which is a challenge for us too. I want to say one interesting thing. I was talking with, so I have a regular study group, which includes a couple of HUC faculty members in Israel. And so I get to learn really interesting Hebrew things that I'm going to teach one of you now. So when God says to Moses to turn around, right, it literally means chazor la'acharecha, like turn around, in order, not like spin around in place and snap your fingers 3 times. But this is how Judaism and how Hebrew understands time. We move through the world backwards. But we can only see what has happened in the past. So we are constantly, literally moving through the world backwards, able to witness the past, unknowing about the future. In the mind of Hebrew, of Israelis, of our tradition, we look backwards. Our disposition toward the past, which I think is really interesting as a concept. And so then when God says turn around, God is telling Moses, stop looking at the past. I'm going to give you the opportunity to look into the future, which is a cool, very physical metaphor, a physical representation of the ways in which we live through the world, we place value on our past and on our tradition, right? And that's important here in this story too. Akiva could have said, my brilliance, my logic, my innovative way of reading Torah has led to these new teachings that I have to give you. Akiva doesn't do that. Instead, Akiva is looking at the past, both literally looking at Moses in his classroom, and figuratively looking to the past, rooting himself in tradition, even as he makes changes. Thoughts, comments? Lori. Great. right? So it's Messina. It's at this place, at this time, not just Moses the guy, but this event of Sinai, of Torah giving. Okay. We also sometimes might feel like Rabbi Akiva, which we haven't gotten yet, right? If you ever try to explain something that's like nobody else is getting, that ever happened to you? You're trying to communicate something, we're trying to explain something, and just the people around us just don't understand. They don't understand our perspective. They don't understand where we come from. They don't understand why it is that we think this way. Or we're trying to share something about ourselves that they're just not getting, right? And so then there's also a way that we resonate with Rabbi, not just with Moses trying to catch up, but with Akiva trying to communicate for himself. And he has to resort, perhaps in a negative way, or not a negative way, but in an exasperated way. Sometimes I read his statement as, this is from Moses on Mount Sinai, as a great connection to the past. And other times he says, you just don't get it. You have to trust me on this. You have to take my word for it. I'm not going to logic it for you. I'm not going to try again to explain it in a different way. This is it. This is my experience. This is my knowledge. This is my perspective. Take it or leave it. And so perhaps he's using this language as also a conversation ender. Says, I've said my piece. This is the law. We're going to move on now. Yeah. Great. So here's a just because example. We have a whole variety of Jewish law that is just because. And I think that is what is happening here. The rabbis of the Talmud are admitting that their laws are there just because. That doesn't mean that they're less important or should just be discarded. But they have the self-awareness to say, this is the way we practice. I don't quite know why. Maybe it's not the most logical. Maybe it doesn't matter why. God said so, I say so, I'm the rabbi, I'm in charge here, and this is how we're doing it, right? That's what the rabbis of the Talmud sometimes say. And so our connection to the past is important, but also not always defining us 100%. So there is that wiggle room, that bringing in of new things connected to the past, but not just perpetuating exactly what was done, acknowledging the evolution that takes place. Now we're going to read the end of the story. And I have like one thought, but this is the part where I really, as students of Talmud, we often get to a passage and we don't get it. So this is a passage that I've thought about for a long time, and I'm not sure I get it even now. So I want your input on this as well. So now we're going to see what happens at the end of the story. Moses returns to God and said, Master of the universe, you have a man like this, like Rabbi Akiva, who knows all these laws, and you gave Torah through me? Right? Who am I to have given Torah to the people when Akiva's going to come along? He should have been the one to give Torah. He understands it in a way that I don't. God responds, literally, shut up, be silent. It's in the imperative, right? Like, shut up, like be quiet. This intention arose before me. As in, this is the way it is. So Moses then says to God, you have shown me his Torah, how great Rabbi Akiva is. Show me his reward. What does he get for being such a learned scholar and teacher and bringer of Torah? God said, turn around again. So Moses turns around and saw them weighing Akiva's flesh in a butcher shop. Akiva was martyred. He's one of the 10 martyrs that we often talk about on Yom Kippur. He was martyred by the Romans in the 130s. And he's the one that when we have a tradition of saying Shema the moments before death, and that's because Rabbi Akiva said Shema right before he was killed by the Romans. It's a very tragic end to this great scholar's life. And so Moses turns to God and says, this This is Torah. This is what you told us to do, to study Torah, to teach Torah. And that's what happens to people who do this. God said, be silent. This intention arose before me. And then the Talmud moves on to talk about some other arcane part of law that has nothing to do with this story. We don't get anything else from the rabbis on this. So what's the moral of the story? This is the end. What is the moral of the story here? This is not a trick question because I struggle with what the moral of this story is. What's the purpose of ending it here? Herb, yeah. We're going to bring the microphone around.
I think we have to define what the word intention means. And if intention means fate, then the die is cast. That's the only thing I could make out of it.
I think Moses is saying, so the Hebrew here, the word is machshava, which means thought. Also, a machshev is a computer. Some really interesting, right, like linguistic connections here. But literally, God said, well, I thought this up. God decided, God admits that God is deciding for this to happen. And Moses is saying, I don't understand why you would allow this great rabbi to be martyred in this way. Yeah.
So I think one aspect of this is that the study of Torah is the earthly reward in itself.
Okay, so we shouldn't expect extra reward from Torah. The act of studying Torah, and perhaps the things it brings us in its immediacy, is the reward. I really like this. I'll just expand on your notion for a minute, right? The sense of community we get amongst learners, that's a reward. The way that it stimulates our mind, that's a reward. The opportunity to live a more thoughtful or purposeful life as long as we're able to, that is the reward. We shouldn't also expect riches and longevity and other things from the study of Torah, but it is its own reward, not based on anything else. I really like that. We'll go here to Judy.
For me, I just think it's one example of tradition versus logic. I mean, that's how I take it.
Great. Okay, so you see this ending of the story really connected to Moshe. This is a law from Moses on Sinai, that this whole story is about the tension or relationship between tradition. This is the way it is. Akiva saying this is the law that was passed down, and the use of logic, and that as Jews, we are caught in tension between these two things, right? We are caught between using our logical side, between wanting a rational explanation for the world, between wanting a rational explanation for why is it that we do it this way, and tradition. This is the way it's been happening. This is the way that God has taught us. This is just the way it is. And we live in this tension. And so the end of the story kind of emphasizes that tension for us. Thank you. We'll go to Lori, and then Avril, and then Nick.
It's another lacrimal ending for something Jewish, which is kind of traditional, but I'm struggling with other words in this passage.
Please.
I am struggling with God telling Moshe to be silent. God has always liked an argument.
Has God?
There are lots of arguments he's liked, other than Lot. But
I would argue that we like to say that God likes our arguments, but I'm not always sure that God likes the argument, but I appreciate this.
I think God really enjoys that back and forth, and that the argument, God wanted Moshe to talk before, and Moshe always said, no, I'm not a man of words, I can't do this, and God kept pushing him before. Now suddenly, when Moshe wants to say something, God's telling him to shut up about this one. Don't say it.
Okay.
Whereas before he's pushed him, and he's pushed him when he hasn't wanted to.
So we have this tension about who should speak and can Moses speak, and you would love that there's other passages in the Talmud that imagine heaven. Maybe this is your heaven, maybe this is your hell. as a Beit Midrash, as a yeshiva, with God engaged in this dialogical argument. The rabbis imagine that heaven is their opportunity to argue with God, and that's what God believes is reward, is that opportunity to go back and forth. And so we struggle then with God telling Moses to be silent in this matter. Yeah.
The line, "Be silent, this intention arose before me," is repeated when God gives the Torah to Moses and when a life is taken. So maybe it's just to explain to us that God giveth and God taketh away.
Wonderful, right? So we have this line twice, once positive, once as a reward for Moses. Moses says, I don't deserve the honor of being the lawgiver. And God says, yes, you do deserve this honor. I'm giving. And then the same line appears when this life is taken away, which God then says also, I'm taking away. I give and I take. And the good and the bad just are, right? So it's an opportunity for us to reflect not only on the unexplained negatives in our life, of which there are many, but also the unexplained positives, the gifts that we feel like we don't deserve, and yet God is telling us, enjoy them. They are yours. This is what is meant to happen. Nick.
I don't understand the words "before me." Does that mean before, prior to?
Okay, great.
What came before God?
So the words before me, lefanai, Hebrew is both, one of the beauties, I think, of the Hebrew language, but also one of the complexities is the combination of physical and metaphorical language in one. So the word lefanai literally means in front of me, right? Dan, you are lefanai, you are in front of me. And means in a metaphorical way, like appeared or it came to mind or kind of it wasn't there and now it's there. I didn't have an idea, now I have an idea. That idea appeared before me, right? A thought popped into my head. So here, God is saying, a thought popped into my head, and this is what's happening. That's the use of the word lefanai, or before, as in front of. But I do like your idea also that lefanai could mean earlier in time, which it does. Lifnei means before. Before I went to the store, lifnei, before I showed up at the synagogue. And so perhaps the Hebrew is also pointing us to this is the way it was always destined to be. Right, that lefanai, before me, could have been earlier in time, and that this was always destined to happen this way. So there's a lot there. Okay, I know we're at 12:57, so I don't want to take us too long. So maybe I'll just offer one more thought, and then I'm happy to stay around for another little bit, and we can have some either full group or small. Great, will do. So I think for me, one of the two, two of my biggest takeaways from this is, in this story, the rabbis transport Moses from Mount Sinai into a classroom. And in so doing, they also put a classroom on top of Mount Sinai, right? That the point of this story is that the law was given, but the giving of law didn't stop. Right? The evolution of our thinking, of our morals, of our understanding, of our teaching, of our innovation continues. Rooted in our history, connected to our history, but not left only there. And here's a moment of even the traditional rabbis in the traditional documents, studied in the traditional places, acknowledging that change happens, that the world keeps moving, that we do our best to keep up with the world moving around us. And sometimes it's easier, and sometimes it's harder. But for the rabbis, just the knowledge of continuity is enough. We're going to sit in the sanctuary and pray in ways that were unimaginable 15 or 20 years ago, was certainly unimaginable 50 or 100 years ago, and I don't know what Rabbi Akiva would say if he walked into our Friday night services. But that doesn't mean that they're wrong or bad, right? Instead, the rabbis are saying we should celebrate the fact that still on Friday night, Jews gather together to celebrate Shabbat. Still, we talk about Moses and Rabbi Akiva. Still, our youth come together and sing and play and learn, and their learning might be different and their ideas might be different, and that's okay because they are still connected to all of this. And so that's, I think, for me, a big way that I try to live my life, both connected to our past, reverent of our past, but open to the continuity, open to the change, open to being the person who makes change, and open to being the person like Moses who sits in the back of the room and says, I have no idea what's going on, but I'm happy to be here. And I'm glad to know that this is happening in this way. Okay, so with that, I'm going to kind of wrap up our teaching and say thank you. I realize, Julie, that you asked me to offer up a prayer for the study of Torah before we started, and I forgot. So we're going to bless what has already happened and the Torah yet to come. So we'll conclude with our blessing for the study of Torah that we have engaged with together, and then I have an announcement for us. So please join me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Not the way we usually do it, but that'll suffice. And Julie wanted to make another announcement tonight. Right where you're sitting at 6:30, we're having a movie screening of the film Screams Before Silence, which is a collection of primarily raw footage from the events of October 7th. And Rabbi Perlman will offer a little bit of debrief and discussion afterward. It is a important and horrific watch. So if you have the internal stomach, the steel, and the emotional and physical strength to be here tonight, you're welcome to join us at 6:30 here in the sanctuary for that film. It is 60 minutes long. 6:30. The movie's about an hour. A little bit under, but roughly an hour. We'll have a little bit of framing. Cantor Korn and Rabbi Perlman and I will all be here. And it's heavy, it's important. I can't say it'll be great because it'll be terrible, but it is a terribleness that we, I think, have a responsibility to witness, to come together as a community, to continue to hold what is happening in Israel and in Gaza in our hearts and in our community, and be engaged with world Jewry and the broader world in remembering what transpired and what continues to transpire every day. So on that more somber note, I'll just offer up another appreciation to Julie and to Jan and to all of you for being here, for learning with me, and I'll be around a little bit.
And for sure, the 8th row was no less wise than the front, because
Absolutely.
we are all wise
Absolutely.
ones here.
Absolutely.
And thank you, Rabbi Torp. We're so
you,
glad
Julie.
you're with us.
Thank you.